Hello guys, welcome back. All right, so for today's vlogmas, I decided to do something a little more like interesting. Is that the word I want to use? I don't know. Maybe it's interesting to the people who've asked, but interesting to me maybe to share with you guys. So today we're gonna go through like Brooke and Pippa's whole history, like me and Pippa together. This is gonna probably be a long one because Pippa and I's history spans almost a decade at this point, which I think is completely wild that like Pippa and I, like this is the longest relationship I've ever been in. Me and you, babe. Me and you, babe. You've been a good girl for almost 10 years with me. Yeah. I know. What a special bub. Oh. Okay. Thanks for that. That was so nice. Okay. Anyways, so we're going to go through our history. And I'm going to try. I figured out how to log into my old iCloud account that has so many pictures of when Pippa and I first started camping and traveling. Like, I found a picture today of my first car camping setup, so like I can show you guys that, like some exciting fun things that I've been able to like dig up from memory lane and show you guys that I have a very similar history to a lot of you. I know everybody's now seen the end results and like some of the ups and downs that have happened in the last couple years, but obviously I'm 31. There's a huge gap in time that like you guys don't know about a lot of my past. So I'm going to skip some of the more traumatic things. So this isn't like a super triggering video, but at the same time, maybe it gives you guys a little bit better sense of like the journey I've taken. And that I wasn't always just somebody who was like, drop everything, travel full time. You know what I mean? So I feel like everybody's heard little bits and pieces about my history and how we started, but I figured I'd put it together all in a timeline so you guys could get a sense of like time-wise when all of this happened and how long everything has taken. And also at the same time, like, know that I've been through a lot of the ups and downs that like a lot of you guys comment and things like that, and that it wasn't just like an overnight decision to just like leave everything behind. Does that make sense? Okay, let's start. So, get comfortable, Pip. Get comfortable. So I have to start a little bit before I adopted Pippa because I've mentioned it in previous videos, but I grew up outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and my parents are still married and were together my entire childhood, but my dad worked across the country than where we lived in Pittsburgh. So from the get-go, I did not Pippa getting so comfortable back there. I did not grow up in a traditional household that had two parents home all the time, but they also weren't separated or divorced. So that's already kind of like an interesting aspect. So I was very familiarized with the idea of like travel and that it's okay to be away from family very, very, very early on in my childhood. And also my parents both moved away from their hometowns as well. So my grandparents and external family was all spread around the country. So I did not grow up like in one of my parents' hometowns with grandparents down the street and aunts and uncles to babysit on the weekends and cousins and a family dinner every Sunday. I didn't grow up in that situation. I grew up traveling to see family spread out around on holidays, in the summer when we would travel, etc. And that led us into RVing as kids. So this is not something that like came out of nowhere. That's more what I'm getting at. It's not like I grew up like a lot of people, which I wish I understood better people who have generations and generations of people who stay in their hometowns, but I don't understand it. I don't have the concept of it from like birth, basically. Like I don't get it. I don't get that kind of family dynamic, and I never will understand it. So it's really hard for me when I give advice to people who have that and like have that huge support system in their hometown. I quite literally just don't understand what that is like, because we've always had to pop around and like kind of keep everybody in the loop. And so I think that's also why I'm very comfortable with my relationships all having long distance aspects to them and keeping up with them on the phone, FaceTime, texting, voice memoing, etc., because that's how I've had to do it my entire life from my childhood. So anyways, moving on from that, we did RV as kids, and we had a lot of fun doing that kind of stuff. We traveled a lot with my dad's work. So from an early age, I've always had some sort of aspect of travel to my life, and I understand. I grew up like upper middle class. I understand that there's a lot of privilege that comes with that, but I also am just telling the truth. Like, that's how I grew up. So I didn't have this like huge jump in my mind from like always being in one spot and then all of a sudden like breaking out. It was more so almost like expected that I wouldn't stay in my hometown or in the environment I grew up in. It was kind of always just this thing of like, just go wherever. And that's kind of what me and my sister both did. So I just want to like do a little preface there. So when it came time for me to go to college, I went to college out of state. I picked the farthest college. My parents at the time, I'm the oldest, so at the time there was like a driving radius that they wanted me to stay in. So I think if I would have pushed harder, I could have gone a little farther, but I got accepted to Purdue University in Indiana, and that was a great university, and that was far enough for me. So I was a good day's driving distance between Pittsburgh and West Lafayette, and that's where I met a lot of obviously college friends and things like that. And so I graduated in 2013 with my bachelor's in education. So when you guys like comment on some of my education videos and you're like, you should be a teacher, that's what I have my schooling in. So I think that's why I'm very comfortable just relaying information to a group of people. And then immediately after graduation, I was very scared of getting stuck in like small town Indiana, where my only connections were friends of mine from college. I didn't have any family in Indiana. I didn't have like any connection or tie to Indiana. So I was like, if I get a teaching job in Indiana and then stay here for years and years and years teaching, that doesn't really make any sense. And I was 21. I was like at the height of partying and going out with friends and socializing and exploring like my whole entire life. And so to commit to like a very small school in Indiana to like teach at for the next 30 years actually gave me nightmares. And so I panicked. I drove down to Nashville, Tennessee with a very good friend of mine at the time. We picked out an apartment. I called my parents and I said, hey, guess what? After graduation, I'm moving to Nashville. And they were like, cool, we'll help you move. And as much as I can say about my family dynamic now, they never really questioned like anything I've been doing. They were like, cool, packed me up, drove me down to Nashville. I nannied for a while, and then I got a job as a manager at Build-A-Bear Workshop. I worked there for a couple years and decided to go back to hair school. So the last year I was working at Build-A-Bear, I decided to get a dog. I really needed a life change. I was kind of feeling very lost in my life. It's that post-grad, like I had younger friends, so they were all signing up for classes, and I was kind of just like partying and had no purpose in life, and was working at Build-A-Bear, which it was a fine time for me, but it wasn't something like career. Like, I knew it wasn't a career of mine. I knew it wasn't like a full-on passion of mine. So I had told my manager at the time, I had stacked up a bunch of like days off that I needed to take. And I was like, I'm going to come back from this long weekend with a 2 weeks notice for you, or I'm going to move across the country, or I'm going to get a dog, or all three. And she was like, okay. I really hope you just get a dog and you stay in Nashville. And so I was like, me too, I guess. And went on, drank a little, like half a bottle of wine that night, went on Pet Finder and found Pippa online. And so I decided to meet up with Pippa's foster mom the next morning. I had like a little phone interview the night before, and they said, you sound great. We haven't been able to find anybody for Pippa just yet. She's been adoptable for a while, but we haven't found a great fit. And so I went to PetSmart the next day and got to meet Pippa. And I'll try to find a picture of when we met, but this is like phones upon phones ago, so this is probably a screenshot of a screenshot of a screenshot. But met Pippa, her foster mom, immediately started like bawling and was like, you guys are, this is it, this is the right fit. And I was like panicking because I was like 22 and I was like, okay, we're getting a dog. And so I immediately, Pippa and I had to go on like an hour road trip to go down to where her rescue was. I got her from Critter Calvary in Franklin, Tennessee, technically, but I wasn't living in Franklin at the time, so I had to go down to the rescue, pay her little pet fee and all that stuff, get the paperwork sorted out. So we immediately were like in the car together, and that's where our journey started. And so she was living in an apartment with me and I was working full-time retail, and the beginning of our relationship didn't go well. I know a lot of people see us now or see people who get dogs, and a lot of people don't talk about that like in between time where your like adopted dog doesn't like you, because Pippa was already a year old, we think, when I adopted her, and Pippa was not cuddly. Pippa really didn't want anything to do with me, but then she also had really bad separation anxiety, so I had to do a ton of training, but I couldn't afford the training, so I was having to just like YouTube it and do it on my own, and it was really rough for her, and my commute was really bad because I was working down in Franklin, but then I was living like an hour away with traffic both ways. So I eventually moved to downtown Nashville with Pippa, and I was living in a townhouse. That was the first house that I bought. I did own the house. I have a whole story about that and being super house poor, and it was like the worst experience of my life ever, but we're not even gonna get into that. And so I had purchased my house, I had moved, I had quit my job, and then was starting hair school, all in that first year that I had Pippa. So we had a lot of life changes going on, and about 3 weeks into me starting hair school was when I got diagnosed with cancer. So that is when Pippa and I's dynamic changed a ton. She really, like, it will make me cry every single day, but like when they say like pets save your life, like pets save your life. And that is when she got super protective of me and cuddly. Like, she knew her role was to like get me through that time in my life. And I could not be more obviously thankful and grateful that I had adopted her before all that happened, because she is just a potato and would just sit with me, and it was the best. And obviously I had to get up and take care of her and do all the things, so it got me out of bed literally every single day. But I was still going to hair school, so I had a dog sitter that would help me during the week when I was going to hair school, but it was only for like, our hair school worked weird, so I actually only went 3 days a week. So I would go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then I would have the rest of the week off so I could recover while I was going through treatment. I did cancer treatment the entire time I was in hair school, and ironically I was the only one to graduate on time in my class, and then immediately started working at a very high-end salon also in Franklin, Tennessee. I did a lot of my stuff in Franklin. I don't know why. But I was living in downtown Nashville. So Pippa has been living the like single parent dog life for a very, very long time. That's why I joke now that this is her retirement, that we get to be together 24/7, because the whole time I was living in Nashville, I was having to have people watch her, because between hair school, being sick, recovering from being sick, and then interning, working my way up at the salon that I worked at, and then being a full-time hairstylist, I was always needing somebody to let Pippa out for me and walk her during the day, because it just was not like feasible for me to do it all myself. So that is where we kind of were like super strained, and I was obviously like, after a while, I didn't want to be living in Nashville anymore. The house that I was living in was still too expensive for me to afford on my own, and Nashville by that point really blew up to like where it kind of is now. This is spanning, you know, 2015, 2016, 2017. It became a like influencer hub, and I was doing hair for a lot of those people. Instagram culture, blog culture was huge. I was very in that scene, behind the scenes, doing a lot of people's hair at the time of those people. It was just very like a weird dynamic, and I was like, I need to get out of here. I need to like leave. So I sold my house in Nashville and moved back to Indiana, and I had friends from college who had moved to like suburbs of Indy. So I lived in Westfield, Indiana. I've mentioned that before. And I opened a salon in Carmel, Indiana, just a little studio. And that's where I lived up until I got on the road. So Pippa and I, same thing, we moved up there. I had a better schedule because I was then self-employed, and I still had a dog walker and I had people that were helping me out, but we were having more of a flexible schedule, and I was really spoiled at, you know, living that flexible lifestyle. So I started to watch a lot of YouTubers that were doing car life and like camping life, van life. This was like 2018 was like starting to become kind of a thing. It wasn't like super popular the way it is now, but the whole nomad lifestyle was starting to like gain some traction. I was watching people like Primal Outdoors, Katie Carney, all of those kind of people who were living alternative lifestyles and like YouTubing about it. And I really wanted to get back into like RVing or camping or whatever. So the way I could afford to do it was car camping style, because that is the most affordable way to get into anything, is just to use what you already have. And at the time, I was still road tripping a ton with Pippa. So I had family all over the country and all over the Midwest. And then obviously I had friends in all of these places. So I was traveling back and forth to Pittsburgh for family. I was going back and forth to Nashville and Indy all the time and doing all these little road trips. And I was like constantly driving. And I was like, I could totally sleep out of the back of this car. So Pip and I went on our first camping trip. I'll put some like pictures in here. I did have a YouTube channel at this point as well. Like I said before, we have like a lot of failed YouTube attempts, so I need to find my first camping vlog somewhere, and how like crazy over prepared I was to go on this camping trip, but it was still so much fun, and Pippa and I got to sleep in the back of my Mazda, and we had these rain guards on the outside because we were camping in Indiana, so sometimes it would rain in the middle of the night, and they didn't have like a ton of the stuff that's like super popular now, so these little car door things would go over my car doors and it would just turn the car into a tent, and I slept out of the back of my car when I would go camping, and that's what we did. And so we did camping trips all over the Midwest that summer, and then we finally drove out to Colorado, and that was like our big trip where we went out to Garden of the Gods. I'll put in all these pictures, and that was kind of really the start of like our travel life, I guess, together, because it was really fun. Like, it was a good time for both of us. Pippa traveled super well in the car. She liked going on these little hikes with me and going to see everything. I loved finding little dog friendly places and finding little things for us to do. And so this was all summer of 2018. I'm trying to make sure I get the timeline right. 2019, I had so many people in my life either getting married, having children, weddings, etc. We were doing, I think in 2019, I stayed home 1 month that I was there. We were and I had to leave Pippa a few times because my career in the hair industry was kind of taking off. I was involved in like a business group for hairstylists. I was doing a lot of like extra stuff where I was going to workshops and classes and things like that. So anything that I could bring Pippa with me, I would, but I also was doing things on my own and like flying around and having to leave her at home. And so I kind of like took a step back at one point in 2019, and I was like, if I'm doing all this jet setting and I'm doing all this stuff, I need to seriously consider how I can do this long term. And my plan was to get my cosmetology license in a couple different states and rotate the states. That was the crazy part. But then I was going to get an RV, and I was going to live out of the RV and take my clients between Indiana, Tennessee, and Colorado. Those were the 3 states I wanted to work in. And that was actually my end goal of 2020. Obviously, we know things in 2020 got weird, but in 2019, that's what I was gearing up to want to do. So I was going to have this be a part of my life, whether I stayed a hairstylist or not. And so when the end of 2019 rolled around and I had been jet setting and doing all these things, I started to look at RVs, and I was really, really considering, should I do this as a hairstylist or should I try to do the YouTube thing again? And I really did not want to continue doing hair. At the very beginning of 2020, I went to a hair convention out in LA, and I remember standing outside on one of the breaks at this hair convention, and I was checking in with the dog walker at home, and I was just like, there was somebody parked in a van in the convention center parking lot, and they were like making their lunch like van lifestyle. And I was just like, I cannot do this. Like, I cannot be away, 12 hours a day, so many days a week with Pippa. Like, we could just be traveling, like just us, and I can do this on YouTube, right? Like, I can figure it out. And I remember looking at them, and I came back from that convention, and I was like, whenever I feel like I get a sign, I'm going to close my salon. And then, of course, February 2020 rolls around, and we start to get the rumblings of COVID. And then I decided, no matter what happens with COVID, on April 1st, I am closing my salon. And my salon made it till March 29th when I got the mayor's orders, or the governor's orders, to close down. So no matter what, whether I wanted to or not, my salon closed at the end of March of 2020. I had to have everything cleared out. I got 48 hours notice before I had to turn everything in, and that was that. I knew I wasn't going to save the salon, and this is the jump, right? Like, you just have to make the jump. So my apartment lease was ending that September, and I just was like, let's jump. So we took some time off. Obviously, I started to sell everything, and being at home with Pippa obviously was amazing. So why would I not, like, want to continue that? Like, obviously after 6 weeks of being at home from that initial shutdown, I was like, there's no way I can go back to 12 plus hours behind the chair. So I got my RV, my Class C RV, and I started to renovate it and film the process and put it on YouTube. And I know some of you guys want to see that footage, and it's awful, but I will link it below if you guys want to watch it. And it's not complete. I never finished it because it never gained any traction on YouTube, but it's out there. And so I spent I think like 5 or 6 weeks over the summer selling everything I owned and renovating that first RV to then get on the road. So from the time I started watching a ton of nomad content to actually getting on the road was 2 years. And that's kind of a long time to, like, prepare mentally to, like, put some sort of nomad thing together, right? So we get on the road, and it was bad. Like, the RV time was not really a good time. I have some good memories in that RV, but the RV portion was not the right fit. I didn't have the right rig for me and Pippa. It was just not what I needed at the time. It was too much for me to keep up with, and it was too expensive for me to keep up with the freelance work I was doing, and it just didn't work out. And so I had started to put feelers out there to sell the RV and to, like, then move back into an apartment for a little bit to regroup, which I think is very normal in this lifestyle. So I want to make that clear. I have not been, like, nomadic straight through, so think about that as well when you're planning. Like, you're okay to, like, go back home or go live in an apartment again or something to, like, regroup. And the night before I was selling the RV, I had a buyer lined up. And so this whole time I had been boondocking because I literally could not afford to stay at campgrounds while I was traveling. And so I had never stayed in a campground really at all, but the night before I had to, because I needed to show the new buyer that, like, everything worked, right? Like, that all the hookups worked, all the electrical worked, blah, blah, blah. I pull into this RV park and hook everything up, take Pippa to go out to the bathroom, and Pippa immediately gets attacked by another dog that was off leash at this RV park. Super traumatic. I'm not going to tell the full story. But she ended up obviously in the emergency vet the entire night. I ended up at urgent care for a few hours because I had to get stitches from where I got bit, and it was just like a complete mess. So the next morning I was like, had my whole hand wrapped up. Pippa couldn't even, like, Pippa was so aggressive obviously then during that part, so she wouldn't even let me, like, pick her up to take her out to go to the bathroom. Like, we were staying at this motel. It was like this awful weekend. It was the worst weekend of my life. And so I'm moving everything out of this RV in the middle of the night with my hand, like, all wrapped up, and Pippa bleeding all over this motel bed. So then I could sell it the next day. And I was like, I don't even care what this guy offers me. And like, we need to be done with this. So I can't remember, like $10,000 or $12,000 out of that RV, sold it, rented a car, drove back to Scottsdale, faked W-2s, I'll admit it, to get an apartment because I obviously hadn't been working, so I didn't have proof of employment. So I faked a proof of employment and got an apartment and moved in. My first day in the apartment, it was like, I could tell it wasn't going to be a great fit, but I had to stick with it. I legally cannot talk about this apartment because I ended up having to break the lease and sign a piece of paper that said that I will not disparage them online. So if that tells you how that went, I stayed there for like 5 months, I think. And that was it. I was out after 5 months. And during that 5 months, I really got my remote work figured out of what I was going to do on the road because like I said, I faked my W-2s at the beginning. So I moved in without a job, even though I like said I had one. So I was paying my rent, you know, through online work and everything like that. I had gone back to what I was doing and I was doing something else that I don't really talk about online and I don't really want to. And so it was just one of those things that like everything kept like just barely working out for us. Like Pippa recovered, we were figuring things out. And so I was like, you know what? I want to try one more time to get back on the road. And obviously while I was living in that apartment, I had saved up enough money from the sale of the RV and like everything like that to buy that Honda CRV that you guys had seen this whole time that I lived in. And I was like, I'm just going to take a road trip and tent camp for a while and see if I like being back on the road in a smaller rig that isn't so expensive as an RV. And so I can kind of like see some more stuff. So Pippa and I tent camped around California and Arizona for, I'll put in pictures too, for probably a month. And then I got a call that there was a job opening for a seasonal job in Alaska. And if you guys have not heard the Alaska story, same thing, super traumatic. But I told it in the podcast episode that's on my page with Andy and Lauren. And so you can listen to it there because it's already really long and this is obviously long. And so Pippa and I flew up to Alaska. The job was bad. I basically got kidnapped, and like held there against my will for a few weeks, which was not great. So we flew back and that was awful. And so when I flew back and got my car out of storage, the Honda CRV that you guys saw this whole time. And that was the first like weekend I had to live in that car because I had nowhere else to go. So when I say like it was a choice, it was like either fake some papers again or just live in the car. And I picked to live in the car. Because at that point, between flying back and forth from Alaska and having things in storage, like I was down to my last, like, I think I had like $1,000 in my account and that was it. And I know that's still a lot, but like you run through $1,000 pretty quick. You know, after like we stayed in a hotel that weekend and had to repurchase like large items. So that's when I bought my jackery again and my camping stove and, you know, to outfit the car and all that stuff. So we ran through that $1,000 pretty quick and we were like on our own. So that whole summer I lived pretty much in the woods in Flagstaff, Arizona, and started my TikTok and started my YouTube channel. And so you guys can go back and watch. Now you're pretty much caught up. You can go back and watch the first video on this channel was when I made my window covers and had finally made my bed. Because I would just sleep with the seats down. That's how I was doing it. I wasn't even covering my windows and I didn't have tint or anything. I was just like glad to have somewhere to sleep that wasn't this Alaskan kidnapping situation that had gone on right before this, and that Pippa and I were safe and it was on my own terms. And so that's kind of where the story picks up where you guys know. So for the whole summer then of 2021, we lived out for for the whole year of 2020, rest of the year of 2021, we lived out of my Honda CR-V, which you guys see online. That's where, if you scroll through my TikTok, that's where I built up my entire TikTok. We traveled a little bit, but again, like I mentioned in other videos, it was really hard to balance building my TikTok audience and work remote at the same time. And so things got a little hairy financially there for a while, until then like March of 2022, like this year, my YouTube channel took off. With the first month that one of my videos took off, it paid my bills through pretty much the end of this year, and it was completely life-changing. And you guys then have seen the progression. So you saw me buy the pop-up and then be able to buy this car, and we're gonna get a new rig soon. So things have been going pretty well. So we've had lots of like ups and downs through this journey. So I don't want anybody to think that like I started thinking about this almost 5 years ago, and it's now just become completely sustainable 5 years later, after so many different attempts and so many different rigs and changing around what I wanted and what I didn't want. So now like things are hopefully more smooth sailing. And there was a pandemic in there. So to anybody who thinks that this is just like super easy, you just move into a car and like nothing changes, and like you just like all of a sudden save all this money and never have like a care in the world again, like that's definitely not what happens. Like this has been a lot for me and Pippa to go through, but we have been together every second of every single day throughout all of that. And I'm so thankful for that part. Like, as much as people can complain that, like, this isn't a lifestyle for this dog, I don't think Pippa's sitting in a dark apartment waiting for me to come home from my job and just having dog walkers come in and out of her life and her just waiting by the door was any kind of life for her either. So I chose the harder route because I wanted this end goal. Like, this is the end goal for us. Like, the fact that I get to make new plans now for 2023 like makes me literally want to cry, because like this is the goal, right? Like us being able to hang out, make a living doing something I've been trying to accomplish on YouTube since 2013. I think I made my first YouTube video after Vine was really popular, and have been working towards this for the last decade of my life. In this now being my full-time income, I never have to leave Pippa if I don't want to, and I'm financially stable, which I wish, like, which I've never been almost in my entire life, and getting to make videos and reading all your comments about how, like, inspired you are and how much you want to do this. But I do want to be transparent that it hasn't been pretty this whole time, but like, you can get there. Like I'm doing it. Like, you can get there, and it doesn't need to be perfect, and you can try different rigs and you can fail over and over and over again, but you can still have the life you want. And I'm sure I'll fail 3 or 4 more times. I'm sure the next rig I pick will be really exciting and fun, and I won't be able to wait to show you guys. But if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, and then we go back to the drawing board and we find something else. And the fact that, like, life is such a fun thing to explore that like you can always change your mind, you can always go back to what you were doing, but at the same time you could always try something new. It will always work out the way that it's supposed to, and I think I wouldn't be as grateful now if it would have just worked out from the beginning and that first channel would have taken off and like I never had to go through any of these on the road struggles, because then my content may not be educational. I don't know. It might have been more vloggy and maybe I wouldn't have reached as many people who need to see the real side of it. And I don't know what past Brooke would have made as content, but I hope with mine you guys find some part of you that relates to it, and there's a reason I've went through it, and I know a lot of the reasons I've went through it, but at the same time, like, at the end of the day, like, I'm so glad that, like, now I have, like, thousands of hours of footage of me and Pippa, and documentation of all of these things that we've done, and all of these phases I've gone through, and all of this is all documented, and it's just wild to me to know that I have all of this now for the rest of my life. And so I just want to say, like, if you were thinking about it, just try. Like, life is too short, just try. And if it doesn't work out, you can always pick up the pieces. You can always figure out how to pick up the pieces. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but you'll figure it out. You really will. So that's our story. I know you're seeing a lot of success, and I'm so glad that you guys get to see this part of me and like this side. But I do want you to remember that it wasn't successful until very recently. So I feel you when I read your comments about like struggling and not knowing what to do and being afraid to get on the road. I feel all of that. It's just a very natural thing for me to do now, and I feel like I just want to push you guys all into like the very first step, because it gets so much less scary after you take the first step, I promise you. But other than that, this video is so long now. And so I'm gonna let you guys go, especially because I didn't realize I was gonna get a little emotional at the end. But I am really proud of myself, and I'm really proud of the Pip, because she's been napping through the whole thing like a good girl. And we're gonna end this vlog, and I'm gonna eat my dinner. And I hope you guys enjoyed hearing a little bit of our story and seeing some of our pictures through the time that we've been on the road. And we'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!